What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Bourbon Blind Live. We got Dr. Pat Heist with us here. He is a wizard of everything maturation, fermentation, distillation, and anything else that has to do with distilling in general, I'd say. So welcome, Pat.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I got a something someone wrote here. A good friend of mine, and his name's Jim, and he is, we'll say he really likes the distillation process. He's real big into everything distilling. And he said, I'm a big fan of your rye whiskey. Great job. You're one of, if not the best, newer, smaller distilleries producing high quality juice. Two things that impress me is it seems you have all the processes nailed from grain to bottle. I believe it's a mouthfeel thickness of your rye whiskey, which I think is evidence of your mashing ability. And I assume low entry proof, which is commendable for a newer distillery. Definitely. Kudos to that. A few bottles of your rye whiskey had a bit of a dill flavor. It seems off profile. Is that caused by the barrel and or have you changed the processes?
So, first of all, appreciate the kind remarks there. Kind of going back to the beginning of what he was saying about, having the process nailed down. Most people that know about Wilderness Trail know about how we got our start. And that was my business partner, Shane Baker, and we co-own Wilderness Trail Distillery. And about 6 or 7 years before we started Wilderness Trail, we formed a company called Firm Solutions that markets yeast and enzymes and does technical support for hundreds of distilleries and breweries. So we had the advantage before we started Wilderness Trail of actively being involved with hundreds of different distilleries on troubleshooting missions where we're trying to figure something out. So, in terms of having the process nailed, we've been in about any distillery that you can name on some type of a consulting or troubleshooting, or right. We supply yeast, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why we, have a good handle on the process. Now, the question about the rye whiskey, that is a single barrel strength product. All of our rye whiskey is released as single barrel strength. So that could be one thing. I mean, there's definitely, we try to keep as consistent as possible. But sometimes with single barrels, even with our wheated bourbon, it is also single barrel. You're going to have a little bit of variations. But some other things that did kind of change is, first of all, we have always been interested in using Kentucky grown grains. We're a Kentucky proud organization, and we want to use as many different things that we can get locally as we can.
And that's awesome.
So, well, yeah, I appreciate it. So whenever we started out, we started with our wheated bourbon because our local farmer could grow wheat and corn, and we didn't have any problem getting that. And we talked to him about growing rye, so it took him a year to pick out a variety that grows well around here. And that's why our wheated bourbon was the first thing that we released. And then about a year later, we came out with our high rye bourbon and our rye whiskeys. So when we first started getting rye, we were getting it from a farm in Adairville, Kentucky, which is down right on the Tennessee line. And until our local farmer was to make more of it. So some of the rye is coming from down there, some of the rye is coming from here. So that could be a possible reason for the variation. The other thing is, when we first started Wilderness Trail, our rye whiskey, we were kind of experimenting a little bit, and we were putting some of it in the barrel at 100 proof and some of it in the barrel at 110 proof. Gotcha. Normally we go into the barrel at 110 proof. But you'll see some of those rye bottles. I've even seen them as low as 96 proof, single barrel strength, and I've seen them as high as up in the 120s. So it could be a matter of that they got. And again, you can look on the bottle to see. I got one right here. It's this is a 113 proof, so most likely this would have gone into the barrel at 110. But if you got one that's 101 or 98 or whatever, that would have gone into the barrel at 100 proof. Nice. So that's another reason.
About how long were you guys going into 100 proof?
We messed around a little bit with that. We might still do some at 100 proof. I have to double check. But we knew we were going to release that as a barrel strength product, and our philosophy there was not only to have that. There's certain things in the barrel that are water soluble that you want to get out, so you're kind of balancing out water versus alcohol based on some things being alcohol soluble, some water soluble that you're trying to extract out of the barrel. But another thing that is kind of so when we first started Wilderness Trail, we were distilling on a 250-gallon Vendome pot still. And now, since 2016, we've been distilling on Vendome column stills. And so we don't distill on the pot still, just rarely we do. And we use that more for pilot stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say to use it for like more test runs or kind of small batch stuff or things you want to test out.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's another reason is we're getting into some of our column still distillate now, which is excellent. We even believe that our column still stuff is better than our pot still stuff. But that could be another reason why somebody, would get a difference in flavor. And then another comment relative to the comment about us being one of the smaller distilleries. A lot of people don't realize it, but we're the 14th largest bourbon producer in the world, based on our capacity. So we've gone from 1 barrel a day to 1,500 barrels a week. We operate 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and we're doing about 215, 220 barrels every day.
That's awesome. That's really
awesome. We're grinding about 160,000 pounds of grain every day, and we generate about 100,000 gallons of stillage every day. So, and we're on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail as of about the exact day that COVID hit.
We're back about what?
Yeah, we're back doing tours now. So
nice. So we were trying to talk about a little off air, and someone mentioned it in one of the questions. And 6-year bourbon.
Yep, that's right.
6-year bourbon.
Yep, we're actually almost into. We started distilling in October of 2013. So this October we'll actually be into 7-year-old stuff.
Nice.
And I'm actually having a little dram of this is our 6-year bottle. So a little bit different color on the label here, and then we've got a 6-year statement here, and then also one up here. Just kind of change the bottle up. Now this is. This run here it's bottled in bond, so it's 100 proof. And this first batch that we did 4, I believe it was 4, it might've been 6, but I believe it was 4 single barrels. Now we didn't indicate that on the bottle, but this first run is a single barrel, release.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the one that they're bottling right now is actually a small batch. So we're not indicating that on the label. Just it's 6-year, and it's bottled in bond. So, it's made by us, bottled by us, and at least, it's 6 years.
8 years. Right. So if you guys started distilling in 2013 and you have products that you're putting out, I know, a few years ago you were putting stuff out right at about 4 years, right?
Yeah, the first whiskey we released was bottle and bond. That was our weeder, and then next was our high rye bourbon and our rye whiskey. We only sell at least 4 years old. We've never sourced any juice from anybody, and we've never released a whiskey that wasn't at least 4 years old.
One of our guys wants to know if you can get it in Louisiana, just Wilderness Trail in general.
I believe so. I know the organizers of the New Orleans Bourbon Festival down there. I think that they're somehow linked into getting barrels, but I believe we are in Louisiana. I'm almost 100%. I can find out what our distributor is if anybody's interested in getting it down there. But
I met the Louisiana distributor at Bourbon Festival. I believe her name was Kat. Don't quote me on that, or Kate. But spent a lot of time at your booth and had some awesome conversations with those ladies and had some great bourbon. Is there a state that you're not in?
Yeah. Right now we're in 22 states.
Okay.
So some states that we're like, probably the next state that we'll go into will be Indiana. That border of Kentucky. So they're close enough to us where they're ready to come down and clobber us for not being in there. But we're already in, Tennessee, Ohio, Illinois, and Virginia, and maybe West Virginia. So we're all around Kentucky. Missouri, we're not in Missouri yet. And,
no one else is in Missouri either. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, we got some people in Missouri ready to clobber us too for not being in there. But
so, man, if you're like I said, releasing older bourbon and, going into all these new states and stuff, because I saw on the website all the states you guys are planning on getting into here soon. Obviously, you guys had to set back a decent amount of barrels when you started distilling in order to release, older barrels even today.
Yeah. I mean, we did kind of have some long-term strategies for, retaining juice so that we'll have, we're going to have an 8-year and another year and a half. We'll have 10 year. I mean, I'm looking forward to our 12-year weeder, putting it on the same table as Weller 12, for example.
Oh, it'll be way above that.
Well,
way better.
So
we know what I think about Weller, so yes, I cannot wait. Not a fan of Weller.
So yeah, I mean that's really awesome. And you said you guys didn't release anything till at least 4 years old.
Yeah.
Was that just pure on a quality standpoint then?
Well, we're a little bit of an atypical distillery operation. First of all, we had over a decade of intensive experience with other distilleries. We know everything not to do in a distillery for sure. And so when we started out, we just didn't make a whole lot, but we only made 300 barrels a year.
Yeah.
But we had a plan to age, and every year we've pretty much doubled our production. So we went from 300, I think, to 700 to 1,500. I think this year, even though we also do a good bit of contract production, which kind of helps to pay some of the bills. We're building right now a 24,000 barrel rick house. We have to have one finished every 90 to 100 days.
Oh,
so
wow.
This place, a lot of people don't realize it. When they come down the road, it's like the theme from Empire Strikes Back. Whenever you come over and you see all these enormous rick houses, it's like, holy shit, man.
Yeah.
These guys are, the real deal.
That's
so,
awesome.
we had the benefit of Firm Solutions to help fund our distillery early on. And so that allowed us to wait. I mean, we didn't even know if we were going to release it at 4 years old. Or probably our moment of truth came. We had Bill Thomas down and some of his friends from Jack Rose up in Washington, D.C. It's a bourbon bar up there. And they were down here tasting barrels in our warehouse. And it was about when we were 3.5 years old. And there were some of the barrels. He was like, dude, if you guys want to wait 4 years, he said, put this in a stainless steel tank and wait another 6 months and send me a bottle of it because I want this flavor. And so he kind of encouraged us that, hey, man, it was tasting good. And so we thought, all right, at 4 years, we'll release some. Otherwise, we'd have waited 6 years.
Right.
And
that's awesome that you guys were allowed to do that. And, financially. And like you said, everything not to do. I think a lot of craft distillers, 18 months, 2 years, God forbid, even before that, they start releasing bottles, and I think it kind of puts a bad taste in people's mouth when
literally,
what I mean? When it's not ready,
That's right.
And I've always said, at 4 years, by then you at least have usually a lot of that woody or a lot of that graininess is gone. That I always feels like I'm in a cornfield.
The green taste is gone.
Yeah. So I think at 4 years, a lot of that is gone. And that's when you really start getting, a next level type product. So you guys must have been pretty surprised at how quick everything was growing, or
we definitely in the very beginning, we have we've got a state-of-the-art laboratory right here on site. So we're able to make sure we're getting high quality grains. We've got science involved with how we're processing those grains, all the cooking technologies for making the mash, converting starch into fermentable sugars. keeping a real sanitary process so that we're not having like significant issues with microbial contamination. Our distillation methods are right on all of our temperatures, the way everything was set up. I mean, my background is microbiology and biochemistry. My business partner, Shane Baker, his background is he's a mechanical engineer. And so he's like the ultimate operations guy of distilleries because, like I said, we've been in almost every distillery you can name. And then we've been down in the basements too, you know. I mean, it's like, hey, man, I want to go down there and see. Then you come back up and they're like, what do you want to go down there for? It's like, hey, man, I'm a bourbon fan. I love going to places nobody's ever been before. So, you know, Shane, he's responsible for a lot of the engineering that went into how we're able to keep a very clean process. And not only that, there's other things like, you know, our barrel entry proof. I think a lower barrel entry proof is more amenable to a 4 to 5 year old release. The other thing is our barrels are air dried. The wood is air dried for 18 to 24 months prior to construction of the barrels.
Nice.
Most Kentucky distilleries go into a 3 to 6 month air dried barrel, which would be fine if you know you're going to an 8+ year.
What char level?
We do a number 4 char.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, independent stave. That's who we get most all of our barrels from.
Man, we watched him, one of the guys from there, talk at Nolan's Bourbon Festival, and
the science behind it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you don't realize, most people don't realize how much, you know, science goes into those barrels. I mean,
absolutely,
it's insane.
You know, the air drying process, a lot of people don't really, I mean, if you stack wood outside and leave it for 10 years, you'll have a pile of sawdust. You know, it disintegrates basically because you have wood rotting fungi. So as you leave that stuff out there for 18 to 24 months, you get the rain on there. You get, so it's actually begun the process of decomposing. There's fungi on there that are liberating enzymes and breaking large wood structures down in smaller wood structures that makes them more easily extractable. You're volatilizing tannins, deacidifying the wood. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff going on just in that aging process of the wood prior to even constructing the barrel.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. So basically, if it's deteriorating, basically you're opening up that wood more to allow more liquid in there for more extraction, and plus,
so you're kind of breaking down the wood a little bit. Again, you got larger wood molecules like cellulose and hemicellulose getting into smaller things that are more easily extractable. You also have the porosity of the wood increases, so the whiskey can get in and out of the wood easier. Then you throw on top of that, you know, there's toasting that can be done. There's different char levels. You know, we do the highest level char. It's a number 4 char. Which just, you know, for a little extra color and, you know, just seemed like the right thing to do.
So you were talking about grains earlier. Do you germinate any grains before grinding or roasting any grains?
No, we use, so anybody that knows about our products, we put the mash bill right on the side of every bottle. So like our wheated bourbon, for example, it's 64% corn, 24% wheat, 12% malted barley. So both of our bourbons have malted barley in them. Now, we don't malt grains ourselves.
Right.
We buy it from a company called Malt Europe. That's where most of the Kentucky distilleries get their distiller's malt from. We don't grow malt. We don't grow barley here in Kentucky to any large extent.
Right.
So that's the only grain that we use that we don't get from a local farm. But our 2 bourbons have 12% malted barley, and our rye whiskey has 11% malted barley.
Now, question on the barley. And this is just purely speculative on my point, and hopefully you can either tell me I'm right or wrong, probably wrong. But I feel like bourbons that have that higher, you know, 8, 10, 12% malted barley content have like a thicker, richer mouthfeel in general. Is that true to any extent, or is that just in my head?
Yeah. I mean, you know, if you look at, you know, go all the way to a single malt, you know, something that's 100% malt, you know, it's really got, you know, a lot going on. And there's a lot of different other things involved in those processes that make it different. But the malt definitely has a lot to do with the flavor.
Is that a 6-row barley?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. I won't know it off the top of my head. But, you know, I mean, like I said, Firm Solutions, we market yeast, but we also do a lot of enzyme technologies. And so we actually supplement with enzymes at Wilderness Trail. You have enzymes in the malt, but you can get benefits like yield benefits. You get more proof gallons per bushel of grain if you use enzymes, and you get you can have faster fermentation, so we can turn a tank over quicker. So those are the reasons why we incorporate enzymes. So we don't have to rely on the malt for enzymes, but we still add it in there because of the flavor.
Okay.
Flavor and color.
Let's see. Someone wanted to know real quick, how has COVID-19 affected the distillery? And most importantly, he sees you guys thriving right now. I mean, is there an impact on sales, negative, positive? Is there any issue going on? We keep hearing out in bourbon land that some distilleries are having some issues due to the COVID, especially smaller distilleries.
Well, yeah, you know, if you're heavily reliant on tourism, you know, then those are the ones that get hit the hardest.
And those are the really small distilleries usually, right?
Yeah, and we also, but the other thing was there was some small distilleries who really had a hard time with tourism, but were able to double down on hand sanitizer. So, you know, a lot of this, I mean, we generate, I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of gallons of hand sanitizer we did there just in 2 or 3 weeks whenever it was really crunch time, like local hospitals were freaking out and everything. So we had, you know, we can make a lot of alcohol. So we're connected with a lot of other distilleries too. So we're able to tap into some of our larger customers who, I mean, it's like, hey man, how many train car loads worth do you want of it?
Right.
And we can get it. So it wasn't a problem.
You just keep running through that column, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now, one thing is if COVID never hit, I would have never had a chance to wear my Slayer face. So that's one thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my mom made that.
Fabulous.
Now, just a quick snippet of background. You were in a band before all this, right?
Well, I'm still in a band.
I'm
still in a band called ZLMA that was hopefully going to play at Louder Than Life this year in Louisville and would have technically been opening for Metallica. But
awesome.
COVID, that's one problem COVID caused is none of that for us this year. But Shane and I, my business partner, Shane, we actually met through a mutual friend who was a drummer. And he was telling me, hey, man, I know this guy can play guitar. And he was telling Shane, hey, I know this guy that can sing. So that's actually how me and Shane met is we started a band called Fulcrum. He's an engineer, man. The engineers won out on the name of the band. I was wanting to like call it Clostridium or some kind of Saccharomyces. But anyhow, that's how we met. And we played in that band for several years. And we play. That's actually we started that band here in Danville, where our distillery is located. You know, a lot of people come here and see what we've done, and they're like, "Hey, man, how did you know to locate your business here?" It's like, "Hey, man, this is where the band played."
Right.
It goes all the way back to when we were scrounging out for beers at field parties and stuff.
Right. Doing shows for a 6-pack.
Oh yeah, yep, some bourbon. Yeah, that's all. I don't think we ever got paid anything more than beers and bourbon.
I mean, there's worse things to be paid in, definitely.
Oh yeah.
So speaking of back to the bourbon, are you guys going to be coming out with a ready on the shelf barrel proof bourbon?
Well, our rye whiskey is all barrel strength, and all of our store picks or barrel picks, those are also barrels. Those are single barrel strength. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of the big liquor retailers. I know like a couple groups out of Nashville have done barrel picks of our stuff. So like on our high rye bourbon, which is, well, let's see here. Our high rye bourbon, which is the black label product. So this is actually the same recipe as the wheated bourbon, but it's got rye instead of wheat. So if you want a good example of a rye versus a wheated bourbon, both same mash bill, just one's got rye and one's got wheat.
Same yeast?
Same yeast, yep, and everything. So this one is normally put out as a small batch, and it's bottled in bond, so it's diluted to 100 proof.
Right.
So if you find a store pick of it, it'll actually be single barrel and barrel strength. So
Awesome.
you can get all of our stuff at barrel strength, single barrel.
Is that it?
Pretty much like that, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is the Happy Trees one that just came in. Firm Pro 1 yeast.
Yeah, FP1. That's
so,
it.
And this is 4-year, 5-month.
Oh, okay.
And man, it's really good. I just tasted against the one off the shelf. The one off the shelf definitely had more of that dill minty flavor, like from the rye dill minty one. This is much more earthy, sweet kind of. So I mean, they're both awesome in their own right, and I mean, it's freaking fantastic.
Anything you can get at 114 proof or higher is up my alley. So this is awesome. But I like Wilderness Trail. So.
Well, that's kind of one of our reasons why we wanted to go into the barrel at that lower proof, not only for extractives, but also we kind of knew that we like drinking barrel strength. And I like the fact that, wow, man, this is exactly what came out of the barrel. No filtration, no dilution, no nothing. And just kind of anticipating that we knew we wanted to offer it at barrel strength. We don't tend to, I like 138 proof every now and then, but normally I'm more of I like it about 113 to 115 as a barrel strength.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed my sweet spot's kind of in that 100 to 115 range. Anything in there, I'm good. She's once like 150 proof, like. But
it's barrel strength, so it's got all that flavor. That's really what I go for. I want something that's going to punch, and want something that's going to coat your mouth, and you can taste it. I don't want the watered down 90, 80 proof that just there's nothing there. So when it's a barrel strength, I've been noticing, you taste better. It tastes more. You can do less proof, and it still tastes just as amazing. Well,
and that's another good, if you were coming out of the barrel at 138 and bottling at 90 or 80, that's a lot of water that never spent any time in the barrel that you're mixing in there, affecting your color, diluting out your flavor. So, there's a lot of different factors involved.
Speaking of the barrels and stuff, someone wanted to know if you're experimenting with different barrel finishes.
Not really yet. We're still just trying to get a good baseline of data on, we've only had 4-year out for a little over 2 years, and that was our weeder. So our rye and our rye whiskey and our rye bourbon, those only have been out, so we're kind of establishing a baseline on our regular stuff.
Right.
And before we now we are doing some experimental barrels. You mentioned, you probably saw Andrew Wybrink.
Yes.
From Independent Stave doing that talk.
Yep.
I went over and hung out with him the other day or a couple of weeks ago. And I can't ever go over there without spending about 3 hours because he's got first of all, he's got about 10,000 different whiskeys over there ready to break any of them out at any time. Right. But he also was that day they were checking out a new machine. It was near infrared technology where they can take staves and just run it over. It looks like a copy machine. But they just run a stave over it, and it just lists every damn chemical that's in there. So they can say, oh, wow, this would be a vanilla stave. So it goes over in the vanilla pile. Oh, wow, this is more of a caramel stave. Put it over in the caramel pile. So if you want a total vanilla bomb, you use all vanilla staves. And if you want, a little mixture of each one, you can kind of mix and match. So there's some pretty dang cool technologies.
And one of the things that he was telling us that I found super awesome, crazy. And I would like to say, I would just like to be there for a conversation between you two, but I think I would need a dictionary and I couldn't keep up. So
I would be mesmerized. I sat there with my jaw open the entire time.
So one of the things that I thought was really cool is he was saying that, like you said, they can measure all that stuff that's in a stave and, like you said, vanilla. like there is actual vanillin compound in the barrel, which is the same compound that's in vanilla that gives vanilla its
flavor. It's the
flavor.
chemical components of vanilla.
Right. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
vanillin is what gives the whiskey the vanilla flavor. But I'm thinking that there's probably a precursor to vanillin that's in the wood that they're measuring. So they can say, hey, this precursor to vanillin, I'm guessing it may be vanillin itself, but I believe that vanillin is actually a result of an oxidative process that results in the formation of it from wood chemicals condensing with alcohols. It's ester basically.
Gotcha.
So, and if you've ever seen that red line that's in a stave, like if you look at a cross section of a stave, there's like a little red line that it's kind of like where all to me, it's where the solids kind of stopped and made sort of a line. But actually that line is almost composed entirely of vanillin based on some research we've done. So we've actually got some experimental barrels here that we did with Independent Stave where we actually modified the outside of the barrel. So to try to enhance oxygen diffusion into the barrel. So a lot of times when you modify a barrel, people are thinking about the inside of the barrel because that's what's touching the whiskey. So we have a lot of experimental barrels where the inside of the barrel was modified, but we've also now got some where the outside of the barrel was modified with the intention of increasing the amount of oxygen diffusion.
Wouldn't that also affect the word I'm looking for keeps eluding me, the stability of the barrel? So you'd also have a lot of evaporation and a lot of leakage.
That's exactly what we're looking at. And so far, I mean, the barrels are still full, and we're 2 years into that project, and there's no visual evidence of leakage. So, it seems like what they did is working, at least in terms of we haven't lost all the juice yet, but
That's
that
exciting.
A concern. Yeah, it's definitely a concern.
So my question to you is, when do we get to try this type of stuff? Like, when is it hitting the market? Because this is super cool.
Yeah, whenever, like, that's an actual experiment. So hopefully we'll be able to share the evidence with everybody.
I want to come play. Like, my science-ness is doing this number and like tingling, like spidey senses, because I absolutely love. That's the one thing I like about bourbon. I don't remember what I like. I love the history of it, but the science behind all of this and the amount of scientific knowledge in the effects of toasting a barrel at a 3 versus a 4 and finding whether or not it's got the vanilla in it is just astounding. So you're totally talking my language right now.
One of the things I think is crazy, kind of along all these lines, is like the amount of science and everything that goes into it is insane. Like some people think, you get your grains, you mash them, you distill them, and you put it in the barrel,
and magically you get bourbon.
I mean, that's not saying that's not what you do, but there's so much more to it.
Oh man, I mean, you start at the very beginning of the process with grain selection. Where were those grains grown? What variety? If I say I'm using 64% corn, that doesn't really tell you anything more than you used corn. I mean, there's white corn, yellow corn, number 2 yellow dent corn, orange corn, red corn, blue corn. Where it was grown is going to make a big difference. How the grains are processed, using a hammer mill versus a roller mill. What's your average particle size of your mill? Is it baby powder fine, or is it got a range of particle sizes to it? Then you get into the mashing process, and some of it is, you definitely want to aim to make a great whiskey. But there's also a lot of things, if my grandpa told me, hey, you need to cook these grains, I'll bring it up to a boil, and then I hold it, and then I do this. Well, if you got your own distillery, you got to think, well, why am I bringing it up to a boil if the gelatinization temperature of cornstarch is between 175 and 185? That's a lot of dang energy that I'm taking to get it way up there. And if I don't need to do that, I'm not going to do it, and it'll be for energy saving reasons.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a heck of a lot of things like that, that we do here to try to save energy rather than, hey, this is the traditional way of doing it. We're like, okay, well, I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to round off the corners and iron out the wrinkles.
You figure out why you do that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then, heck, man, if I don't have to get up that high temperature, then I'm not going to waste all that energy, because then you got to cool it back down. So if I'm cooling something down that's 220 degrees versus 185, there's a lot of energy savings, in doing that. And we even do other things like in our cook process. We don't put all the water in at the very beginning. We only start with part of our water so we can add water that never got heated to bring our temperature down, because we're cooking. You cook the grains at different temperatures. We're cooking our corn like at around 185. We're cooking our wheat or rye around 160. We're cooking our malt at about 145 to 150. So whenever you're doing those temperature reductions, we just save a little bit of our water, like I said, that we never had to heat, and we actually use that to keep it cold, and that's what we use to cool it down. So it affects, the size of the chiller that we had to buy, or the size of the boiler that we had to buy, the amount of energy consumption. There's a lot of things.
That kind of reminds me of a story. Real quick, lady was cooking
I thought of this exact story. It wasn't a ham. Okay.
It was the ham, and their family had always cut off the top 2 inches of the ham. And it was just for like 3 generations they had done this. And long story short, they had said, she's like, why am I doing this? Like, well, talk to your grandmother. That's how I learned. And she talked to her grandmother. She said, well, back in the day, our ovens were smaller, so that we had to cut off the top of the ham to fit it in the oven.
Yeah.
It wasn't because it was for the flavor. It was just
I instantly went to that story. It's a little different in my head, but it's the same story. It's like,
it was just a tradition thing. It wasn't because it was a better process. It just
That's the size of the pot she had. That's another way of looking at it. You cut it to fit in Granny's old pot that she had.
Right.
But so those are some traditional things. But we really, like I said, not only looked at all of the different processes that all of our hundreds of customers use, and which ones are the best and which ones have issues, and then and also apply our own science to that. That's exactly what we do for our distilling customers on a day-to-day basis, is help them make the best decisions. And so all those different things come into play. Another thing that we do for many distilleries as well as ourselves is we're looking very deeply into fermentation. So, you put that yeast in there, and really it's pretty much, it's going to do what it's going to do. It's not, if something goes wrong, usually you're trying to save the next batch instead of save that batch.
Right.
So, and one of the things that can go wrong is it gets contaminated. There's bacteria that can contaminate the fermentation. I mean, most distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, we have open top fermenters. You ever seen a beer company that has open top fermenters? It wouldn't happen. They're all closed top, because it's so easy to contaminate wort when you're making beer. Whole grain mashes, which we're fermenting, leaving all the grains in there. Beer people ferment after they've removed the grains out.
Right.
So it's much more susceptible to microbial contamination. So they really have to be super anal about cleaning, which we do too, but it's a little more forgiving. Our process is probably a little more acidic. And so that in itself, and if you consider sour mash versus, we do a sweet mash process. So we're starting with all fresh water at the beginning. Sour mash producers are adding back set, some leftovers from the previous distillation, and that acidifies the mash even further, and it curbs bacterial contamination. But our laboratory is running, we do liquid chromatography every day on each batch, and we're looking for, are we using up all the sugar? Are we making the amount of alcohol that we should be making based on the amount of grain that went on that batch? And then we're also looking at things like lactic acid production. Lactic acid is an organic acid that's produced by bacteria, but not yeast. So whenever we see that, we know there's bacteria in there that made that. And whenever it gets over a certain level, and our level is 0.3%, if the lactics get over 0.3%, then the lab's going to go in there and culture and actually isolate those organisms, cryogenically store them. We've got 45 to 50,000 different bacteria in our collection from distilleries all over the world. You want to crack the code on flavor at these real old distilleries, including some of the old Scotch distilleries, you need those bacteria that are growing there. So So when the lab gets a reading on the HPLC over 0.3% lactics, we'll actually culture those organisms, store them cryogenically, and then 4 to 5 years down the road, if you're tasting it, it's like, oh my God, what is this note that I'm getting here? A lot of times you can go back to those bacteria, smell them on a plate, and you'll get that exact same note. We actually sell bacteria to distilleries so they can add it for flavor.
I do have a question for you. After you cryogenically store these bacteria, could you go back and reactivate them somehow? So that
that's the whole reason that we cryogenically store them. So we isolate them, make pure cultures from them, and then we put them in a liquid solution that allows them to be stored indefinitely at a super low temperature. So we have cryogenic freezers here.
I know.
So like I said, we've got 50,000 bacteria from hundreds of different distilleries.
Yeah. I know Brent Elliott was talking about they had a yeast that mutated on them back in the late 2000s, something, 2005-ish, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard about it, but after they tasted it, 6, 8, 10 years later, whatever it was, they had already tossed out. They had found the mutation and tossed it out and started fresh. And yet when they went back and tasted it all, those years later, they found out it was really good.
Yeah. We save everything.
That's a smart way of doing it.
I was actually at a bar last night here in Danville, and they had some pineapple cider that kind of went a little south on them, but it had a really nice acidity to it. So the first thing I did when I got to work today was brought the lab a sample of it in a cup, and they culturing those bacteria out of there. One other interesting thing, a lot of times when people think about bacteria, you're thinking about germs and disease and all this kind of stuff. But the bacteria that cause contamination at distilleries and breweries most often are the same bacteria that they're selling as probiotics now. So we actually probably have the world's largest repository of probiotic bacteria anywhere.
Which is good for your stomach and good for your intestines and everything else. So bacteria is what makes the world go round.
Absolutely. I mean, we deal a lot with we do a lot of business with non-alcoholic fermented beverage producers as well, like kombucha, kefir, and there's a lot of things to learn in terms of how do contaminating organisms contribute to flavor.
So with that pineapple comment, are you hoping to turn out some pineapple flavors in your bourbon?
Well, it tastes like pineapple because it had pineapple in it. But what I liked about it was the acidity of it. It kind of made me think, wow, I bet this would be a good one for a sour beer. So if there's a yeast in there in particular, maybe we'll start selling that to somebody that wants to make a sour beer.
That'd be
interesting.
Awesome.
That'd be cool. That'd be super cool.
We save them all, though.
Which is fun. Awesome.
Sounds like fun.
Someone wants to know how you guys came up with your label design.
Well, whenever you got 4 years before you put a product out, you get a lot of time to think about it. So our label design went from very rudimentary to what it is today. And, a lot of it, myself and Shane, and we've got some other marketing people on our team and graphic designers that, we don't get too sophisticated. We don't like to hire outside agencies to try to come up with a bunch of stuff. We try to do as much ourselves as we can. We came up with our own logos and all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just patched it all together, man. It's just kind of like a kindergarten art project.
It's one of those things, like, it looks very classy, but at the same time, it's very different than what you see out there.
And that's a stock bottle too. So that's not like a custom bottle either.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That saves a ton of money right there.
Yeah, that saves the consumer and us a lot of money.
Custom bottles are cool, but when it raises the cost of the product, 10, 15, 20 bucks, that really starts to impact a lot of stuff. And you guys are right in that, $40 to $50 price mark, which is
perfect.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that's, some of these people think, craft distiller 80, 100, 150 bucks for a 2-year-old product. And it's like, man, I would love to support you as a small distillery, but $100 plus for a 2-year-old product that I haven't tasted, is that's a hard pill to swallow. And, for a lot of people, like that's hard to pick up off the shelf because,
yeah, there's only one chance to make a first impression.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're rocking it out of the park, let me tell you, because at New Orleans Bourbon Festival, I drank a good. I kept going back to your stuff. I am a huge fan. Loved the all of it. I can't even begin to say. And speaking with you tonight has been such a privilege. So
I appreciate it.
So I got to ask, when you're not drinking Wilderness Trail, what would be your next favorite rye?
Well, actually, I picked up a bottle. I was down in Nashville visiting some friends last couple weeks ago, and a buddy of mine down there is doing has got some aged whiskey that they're releasing. If you ever heard of Nashville Barrel,
yep,
Mike Hines and those guys. So I was really digging the rye. So that's a 7-year-old rye. I think it's sourced from MGP, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But that's a really good rye. New Riff has been killing it, up there with some great products. I'm a big fan of New Riff.
One of my favorites, but you guys are my close second. Not to lie.
I love New Riff, and they're coming out with a lot of good expressions and stuff. I actually did a TEDx talk out in Reno, Nevada.
Oh, really?
Probably like 2 days before COVID hit. I was lucky that I even made it back to Kentucky.
I'll have to look that up.
But I visited a distillery out there called Frey Ranch. It's called a state distillery, and they grow all their own grains on site. And they have a 4-year-old bourbon. I actually brought back a couple cases of it with me. On the subject of cool bottles, they got a killer ass bottle, but it's some really good juice. So that's a 4-grain bourbon, and Frey Ranch, and they're out in Fallon, Nevada. So if anybody's out west, that's a killer place to visit, and it was putting out some great whiskey as well.
Nice,
awesome.
So are you guys messing around with any kind of 4 grains or different mash bills or anything you can talk about?
Well, we've got mostly we're doing our 3 main ones, but we do have some 4-grain aging. But if you even just consider the 3 that we're doing, and then consider you could have bottle and bond, it could be barrel strength, it could be small batch, it could be single barrel. There's a lot of ways to run those expressions. I mean, at some point in time, like I said, the first year we made whiskey, we made 300 barrels a year. We do 65,000 barrels a year now. So when it comes time to try to get rid of some of that, we're going to definitely probably also have a lower proof expression that's a little more, economical and different things. So those will be some other things that, maybe not be that exciting to bourbon fanatics, but there's a lot of ways to do 3 different mash bills, Hell, we could start blending them together, do our own infinity blend or something.
That'd be amazing.
Absolutely.
All of those are amazing.
Someone had a question and
you lost it in this. I didn't catch it.
I saw
I've been too busy geeking out.
I don't remember now. So what all, I know you have your doctorate, and that is in
my master's and PhD are in plant pathology. So I actually used to do a lot of work with extension plant pathology at University of Kentucky. So that's where, a farmer has a problem. They go to their county extension agent. If the county extension agent can't solve it, then they go to university extension. And then you've got laboratory expertise and, people who are experts in bugs and bacteria and fungi and viruses, depending on what the problem is. So then we help the extension agents solve the problem. And so that was a lot of microbiology. My bachelor's degree is in microbiology. So my master's and PhD in plant pathology, I was able to explore a lot, which has become important with, looking at grain crops. And I got a lot of experience in microbial diseases.
And stuff that affect those. Sorry.
Yeah. And then I was interestingly enough, my first job out of graduate school, I actually got a job as a medical microbiology professor. So I used to be a medical micro professor for 6 years over at the medical school in Pikeville, Kentucky. And then that's during that time is when Shane and I started Firm Solutions, and very quickly moved into our own facility.
So I don't know if you can talk about it or not, but did you guys help out Glens Creek when they got started at all?
I mean, normally we maintain confidentiality. If they want to talk about it, that's fine with us. But I'm not aware of, what level of confidentiality we have with, right off the top of my head, just in a conversation, so normally we're just
fine.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I just know they were talking about, they went to the old Crow distillery and, they got out the yeast cultures and that kind of stuff to use for them. So I don't know if,
But we do a lot of that.
We do
a lot of that kind of stuff. We've had a couple, one of the ones that we did that for, who has, come out and publicly, there's been articles and public information about it, is Limestone Branch. Steve Beam over at Limestone Branch, he's now with Luxco. So, his family was rich, the Dance and Pottingers and the Beams. So, he went to the Oscar Getz Museum over in Bardstown and got the old family whiskey, or the family yeast jug. So it's a copper vessel that, supposedly they kept their yeast in. Like they would take that jug home with them every day. If the distillery burned, at least they'd still have their yeast strain. And so we actually had that jug in our lab for a while, and we tried culturing yeast out of it, which, it would probably been dried out for over 100 years. So we weren't successful at doing that. But what we were successful at doing is getting enough mash residue out of there to where we could extract DNA, generate nucleotide sequences, and then based on that DNA sequence, we matched it up to a yeast in our collection. And then, so we do a lot of forensic stuff like that too, where we're looking.
That's awesome. I'm sorry. I was like, so you matched it up to something that's today, and you obviously were able to find something that would work.
Yeah, we have our yeast collection. We've probably got 9,000 different yeast strains that we've isolated over the last 10 years.
That is awesome.
Jim wants to know, he was the one that wrote the comment in the very beginning. He said, if you had to distill your very best barrel, what kind of still would you use? But I'm sure he's probably referring to pot or column or
whatever. And I was going to ask that earlier in the conversation when you were talking about going from pot still to column still. Like, what do you prefer, and exactly what's the?
Yeah. Well, what I'm drinking right now came out of a pot still, and I'm enjoying it quite well. If you know what you're doing and got the right equipment, we like I said, we advise hundreds of different distilleries on equipment purchases, and the only still that I would ever have would be from Vendome in Louisville.
Right.
And our pot still is from Vendome, and both of our column stills are from Vendome. Now, if you do a pot still right, like I said, I'm drinking great pot still stuff right now. If you do it right, I mean, you could be the best distiller ever, but if you screw up fermentation or don't get good grain quality, then you're dead in the water before you ever fired your still up.
Right.
In terms of consistency, most likely you're going to have a better chance of getting consistency on the distillation part of it on a column still, because it's just the same thing all day long. You don't have to make cuts. You're making cuts, but they're just happening as you're running the equipment. The mash only spends probably 60 seconds in the still. In a pot distillation, the mash stays in there the whole time. It's 5 hours plus. So you're just cooking it till all the alcohol's gone. In a column still, you're flashing off the alcohol and other volatiles in a matter of about a minute.
So let me ask you something on that. We did a barrel pick at Knob Creek last year, and part of the tour they said, what being a barrel pick, they usually do a little more behind the scenes type stuff, and they're like, "Is there anything you guys want to see?" And I was like, "I want to see like the QC room." You know what I mean? And they took us in there, and they had their people in there, and they had probably 50 or 60 glasses lined up that just had all clear distillate in them, with little caps on top. And they said, we were welcome to go smell them and whatever else. And I did, and I just took 3 or 4 of them. They said each one of them was from
separate batches.
Yeah. but they were all the same. They were all the same mash bill and everything else.
Yep.
And every one of those smelled uniquely different.
Okay.
And I would figure someone on Jim Beam's scale, you know what I mean, with that big of still and their product and everything else being, I would assume, fairly consistent, that there would be so much variation in those batches.
Mm-hmm. Well, if that's the observation that you made, then, you know, there's probably something to it. You know, I mean, we do the same thing. So we're going to take that new make in every batch. So right now we're running fermenter batches that are 4,000 gallons, and we're running fermenter batches that are 20,000 gallons. So our 20,000 gallon batches, we're getting like 60 barrels of bourbon out of one of those.
Right.
So one little Glencairn full of distillate is representative of what went into 60 barrels on our large batches. So over a week's time, we're running 6 batches a day, 3 20,000s and 3 4,000s. And that's going to be 6 samples that we're going to generate every day. So every 3 or 4 days, we're going to have 20 or 25 samples down there. And what we'll do is we'll proof those down. So I don't know if in the Knob Creek experience you had, when you're tasting the new make distillate, if it was proofed down, usually you'll proof it down to as low as 40 proof. And when you dilute it out, it allows you to really taste any off flavors. So we'll do what we call it panel testing. So we'll go in there and taste through. Now we've got 3 different mash bills. So if I'm going down the line, it's like consistent. And then all of a sudden, holy, this one's really different. It's like, oh, well, no wonder I just switched over to a rye distillate. So,
Gotcha.
you know, the purpose for doing that is to, you know, first of all, is there anything wrong here? You know, is there something that's off spec for what we're going to expect? You know, we have had rare instances where, you know, maybe the equipment conveying the milled grains into the cooker tank, a little bit of steam backtracked up into there, and we got a little bit of moldy grains up into there. Well, heck, right as soon as you taste that distillate, it's like, wait a second. Then bam, we go straight out there, fix the problem so that doesn't ever happen again. You know,
right.
a funky new make can end up being a really great aged product too. So we just want to keep track of what we did. I mean, maybe if that one with the rotten grain up in the conveyor, it'd be the best whiskey ever. And we were like, oh, we're going to start rotting the grain in our conveyors from now on.
So if you guys did something like that and you found out about it in the distillate, you go ahead and barrel it and mark it and see how it turned out then.
It's rare that a distillery is ever going to discard distillate unless there's just something bad. You'd be more
Really
likely to discard the fermenter batch and not run it through distillation than you would be to try to, because you never know. Like, you can take terrible wine and make a great brandy from it. You know,
right.
So you just never know how it's going to be. It can be a little off. Now, preferably, you're going to want a delicious tasting new make going into a barrel, and that's going to tell you, okay, this is definitely going to come out as this is a very rare occurrence when we get any kind of off flavors. And usually it's not like, it's just something a little bit different, you know, and that's good. But we just want to know, why is it different? And because we don't want things to just be going different all the time and us not have control over it. So
we're going to know how to reproduce it too if it's really off and it's really good at the end of the run.
That's right. It's really about, and also learning. So if we get a certain note every now and then we also have academic partners. University of Kentucky is one of them. I mean, we even do research with like UC Berkeley and MIT and different universities. Like, if we need some heavy hitting, you know, genetic engineering or something, we got the collaborators to do it. But we've got mass spec capabilities where we're actually looking at, we're working with a group out of University of Miami, Ohio right now that's using LC mass spec to look at. They've identified over 1,700 different chemicals in bourbon. So if we've got one that got a little funkiness to it, we can run that, and then we run a control, and then the machine will actually subtract out everything that's the same between the samples and only leaves you with what's different. So then we can say, oh, wow, that off flavor, that is geosmin. That was a water issue. Or this off flavor, that was from bacterial contamination. And
you
here's
go back and culture the damn stuff, right?
Yeah.
Figure out what culture, when, and where, and let's go play.
That's right. Yep.
One of the, I want to say it was Heaven Hill, maybe. The master distiller was doing a presentation somewhere. And he was saying one thing he noticed is they do a sour mash. And one of the things they noticed was when they took, when they did a run of rye and they took that back set and used it for the next bourbon mash or their next bourbon run, that for whatever reason, those, and he said he had no clue why, but those runs, those bourbon runs tended to come out exceptionally better than their standard bourbon runs.
Because rye
is
is awesome.
Well, I mean, rye is awesome.
The rye in it. It makes it better. It's a high rye.
But I mean, are they taking part of the mash or are they just taking the yeast?
No, normally when you talk about somebody incorporating something from a previous batch, you're talking about back set, which is it's all the leftover water and grain that comes off the still after you remove the alcohol. But normally you'll run it through a centrifuge to pull out a lot of those solids so that really you're just putting the liquid back.
Gotcha.
But that back set is acidic. You know, we normally start fermentation close to 6 pH and we end up down in the low to mid 4s.
Wow.
And so if you use back set as part of your water, it makes the mash more acidic, and that acidity will prevent bacterial contamination. It won't like alleviate it, but it makes it less likely to occur. Right. And the other thing is, if you consider that stillage comes off of the still at 213 plus degrees Fahrenheit, if you're using 20% of your water that's already 200 degrees, you save a lot of energy. And then lastly, you know, even here at Wilderness Trail, we're generating 100,000 gallons of stillage every day. So that's probably our biggest pain in the butt we have here is managing 13 to 15 semi-truckloads of that going out here every day. And we give that away to cattle farmers. And if we don't have anybody to give it to, we got to shut the still down. So we got to get rid of 100. We generate 100,000 gallons of that every day.
So I've noticed that's one thing a lot of distilleries seem to do, and that's, I guess that would be why, is they don't even want to deal with selling it. They just need it gone. Then, right?
Well, a lot of them pay to get rid of it. You know, we pay to get rid of it. If you don't have anybody come to take it for free, then there's plenty of people that'll come and take it if you pay them.
Right.
So we try to avoid that. And, you know, my business partner and I, we own a bunch of cattle. And so we actually have a cattle operation that takes about 10 to 15,000 gallons of that every day, but we're still left with 80, 90,000 gallons every day that we got to deal with. And when it's summertime, there's grass in the fields, they're less interested in getting it. So it's really, we got to be real strategic about how because like I said, we have to get rid of it.
Right.
So leaving it out in the middle of the field's not going to work, is it?
well, like I said, after 10 days, that'd be 1 million gallons. And then what are you going to do the rest of the year, you know? So, yeah, it'd be a bad deal quick. You know, a lot of distilleries, if you're located like in a big city, you can put it down the drain and just pay like a fine for doing that. But we're not. We're in a small city here. You know, it would take a municipal water treatment facility that treated a city of 2.5 million people. And we're in a city that's got 20,000 people. Like, it would shut the whole damn thing down in
due to grain sludge. Wow.
One of the last questions I have for you, water dilution. Is there, I mean, obviously you don't want to just use, you know, I guess tap water or any other random water.
Spring water. You want to use something without anything.
Right.
In
like
it.
that's, can you talk about that for a minute? Or
if you're talking about diluting the distillate, you know, for fermentation, you can use municipal water. We use municipal city water for our fermentations. For gauging, which would be when we're coming off the still. So we're normally coming off our column still between 137 and 138 proof. You know, bourbon's can't be distilled over 160. Our equipment runs best at about 137, 138 proof. You can't go into the barrel any higher than 125. So that's one point where you're going to be diluting before it goes into the barrel. So we're diluting from 138 down to 110. So we're going to use like RO water for that, reverse osmosis water.
Mhm.
So it's ultra clean. And then when it comes out of the barrel, if you're going to do a dilution, that's another spot where you'll dilute. And again, that's going to be RO water is what they call it, reverse osmosis. So we have
Gotcha.
a couple reverse osmosis systems that we run water through, and it takes out all the elements and different impurities.
And that takes out pretty much everything, right?
Pretty much everything, yep.
I mean, you're getting pretty close to distilled water at that point.
Yep, exactly.
Gotcha. Well, Pat, if you'll hang on for just a minute, man, it has been an absolute blast talking to you. We really appreciate you coming on here and talking to everyone and talking to us, and just
taking the time out of your busy schedule and
talking about
out with us.
Wilderness Trail, man, and all
my pleasure. Always happy.
Awesome things you guys are doing. So, if you'll hang on for just a minute, everyone else in the chat, I appreciate you guys coming in. All the super chats, thank you so much. And we will see you guys next time.